national government and in this budget. And let me just tell you why I think that is the case, Mr. Speaker. All of the whole community, everybody in the community have had a view on what is in this budget. And based on recent responses to that, about 85% of them support the content of the budget and the direction of the government. They think it's fair and they think it's the best budget there's been for a long time. And I guess that probably explains why we're on this side of the House and why the Labor Party are on that side of the House. They, after 9 long years in government, 9 long years, never realised in any of that time what it would take to turn the New Zealand economy around and capture the opportunities that are there for us in huge abundance. And in a time with the economic circumstances better than we've seen in a generation, they squandered enormous opportunity. So what is the national government going to do about that? Well, first of all, there is a $14+ billion tax cut for middle New Zealanders. For New Zealanders, a $14.3 billion worth of tax cuts for hard-working mums and dads up and down this country that just want a fair go, so that they can be competitive with their Australian cousins, so they can be competitive in the businesses they run, so that they can be competitive internationally. And the Labor Party never got that. They never understood it. So that is the first thing that this budget does. A typical family in a 2-children household with a household income of $76,000, you would hardly call them rich in today's standards, $76,000, they are going to be $25 a week better off after the effects of this budget come into effect. $25 a week. It's the biggest tax reform we have seen in this country in a quarter of a century, Mr. Speaker. The biggest tax reform in a quarter of a century. 9 years of Labor, and what did we get? We got a health system that was struggling. We got a health system that was crumbling at its elective surgery. Was the waiting lists were getting longer and longer. What have we had after 2 budgets from the national government? We've got more operations than we've ever had before. We've got better health outcomes, more, faster, sooner, front row health services than we've ever seen in the history of New Zealand. What have we got in education? We've got more, better, faster, higher standards in education. Well, they bay over there and say that's not true. Which part of it's not true? Stand up and tell us which parts are not true. Every single bit of that is a fact. In the Taranaki King Country, these people would be interested to hear, I'm sure. In the Taranaki King Country, despite the fact that it has a farming background, it is a low socio-economic area with a large number of small towns with decile 1 and 2 and 3 schools and a very long distance to travel for core health services, a low decile economic area. Those people and the companies and firms and businesses and mum-dad operators in that electorate are going to benefit from these budget initiatives more substantially than they have in the last 9 years. And all of this at the time of what's been described as a worldwide economic crisis. I haven't used that term. In fact, I think it's probably overstated. But that's what the economic markets are saying. That's what the commentators that are apparently more experienced than us and more knowledgeable on these issues than what we are saying. So in this economic crisis, the National Party has been able to deliver the greatest tax reforms we've seen in 25 years. So what else is in this budget for people? Well, first of all, when you look at what's happening with our superannuation payments, they have gone up. How long ago since that happened under a Labor government? You would expect that the Labor Party would have been, as their core constituent, as a core constituency group, they would have been very conscious of what's happening with our elderly folk in New Zealand. And what did? They loaded more and more costs, more and more inflation, worse health care, worse education for their grandchildren, layers and layers of cost. And this government, under this budget, Mr. Speaker, for the first time in many, many years, is now being able to turn the great ship of New Zealand around in a more economic direction and start to stimulate the growth and the jobs and the opportunities that we so desperately need. And I have to say to you, looking at the reaction from the Labor Party through this, Mr Speaker, I wouldn't want to be where they are. It's so much nicer on this side of the House. And we're going to be here for a long time because of the outcomes of this budget. So, you know, suck it in, get used to opposition. It's a great place to be. It's a great place to be if you're the Labor Party. They're better at opposition than they ever were at government, and they were no good at government either. So get used to it. And this budget, Mr Speaker, this budget is going to do more for mum, dad, hard worker, Joe hard worker out there than anything that has happened under the Labor Party in the whole time that they were in government. Look at what's happening in regard to research and development in the agricultural sector, Mr Speaker, the PPTs. Have a look at what's happening there. Have a look at what's going on there. For a start today, there's been some development and an announcement that $36.15 million is going to be expended in the Fine Wools or Merino New Zealand program, which they've been promoting for some time, which will allow them to develop markets and do genetic work in regard to improving the meat yield or meat quality from merino sheep. And Mr Speaker, you're in a very good position to know how important that is to the New Zealand economy. One slight success story, you might say, on what has been a pretty dull horizon for the wool industry, and now they've stepped forward and they're going to take full advantage of the money that's been made available by the government to help them in this research program. The forestry sector, another sector that's been on the back foot for a long time. In fact, forestry in New Zealand has been in decline for about the last 7 years. There have been less plantings going on in the forestry sector for the last 7 years. And what's happened in the last 2 years? Well, suddenly we're starting to see investment flow into there. And the member from Rotorua, it's interesting, one of the biggest forestry areas in the country is baying from the other side of the House. Well, she should have a look at what's in the budget for the forestry sector and what's been announced. $5.5 million program to develop better harvesting technologies. Now, why would you want to do that? One, it makes forestry more efficient, so therefore more competitive internationally, and two, there is a far less environmental impact from having that type of technology developed. Now, you would think the former member from Rotorua would be quite keen on some of that stuff and would be getting up and giving a more passionate speech about it than what I am in support of it. But no, the role of opposition is always to oppose. Doesn't matter how good it is, they will oppose it, no doubt, and they will talk about it. So the PGP partnership with government and forestry sector is going to bring about some substantial development in that regard. And there are a number of others, Mr Speaker. It was announced today that there are a number of people that are making very loud noises in regard to what they may do. They haven't said exactly what they're going to do, but they're working closely with the national government in regard to what's going to be spent in research and development, particularly in the agricultural and primary industry sector. And, Mr Speaker, if we are to get New Zealand up and running, then it will be the agricultural sector once again that will achieve that. If you look at New Zealand, it is an exporter of protein. We have three sources: fish, meat and dairy products. The dairy industry is growing year on year. It's strong, and these tax initiatives and these budget announcements will help that industry, but it will equally help the other industries. And, Mr Speaker, the work that's going on in government too, and future legislation that's potentially going to come to this House in regard to aquaculture can only be positive for New Zealand. And meat and wool, particularly with the announcements today, has a bright future as well. So, Mr Speaker, I totally support this budget. This has been a substantial step forward for New Zealand, and it is something that I'm very proud to be associated with tonight. Thank you, Mr Speaker.